Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of SEOs Getting Coffee. And what a lovely Friday morning. And today we're going to be talking about audience analysis and how that can help you create some helpful content. And we have Annika here who has joined us. Annika, please introduce yourself and thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Very much looking forward to the chat. It's a fun topic, I think. My name is Annika. I'm the SEO director at 𝗧cie Digital. We're an SEO agency based in Bristol, and I head all the sort of delivery and commercials at our agency. And one big part, obviously, what we do is content marketing and content writing, and the kind of helpful content area is something that I've been super interested in and still want to learn much more. But I think, this kind of topic resonates really well, I think, for lots of people, especially after the recent updates that we've had.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really excited to be to be talking about it today. And once again, thank you very much for coming on. I know Emina has got way more questions than I have, so I'm going to let her jump in because I know she's itching to start asking you some questions. So I'll let her jump in with the first one.
So just to kind of say the topic, because we've been like squirting around it, today we're going to be discussing obviously helpful content, but specifically audience analysis when it comes to helpful content. So my first really question is, when we're talking about helpful content, what are we actually talking about? And, what's your definition of it? And where do you kind of see the audience side of things fitting?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously Google has been pretty good at giving us some guidelines on what is helpful content. But I think it's sometimes quite interesting to do your own research and analyze content from your perspective and try to match it with Google's guidelines. And obviously one of the biggest areas that Google want to push forward now is the sort of people first aspect. And if we're looking at their guidelines, but also just generally thinking about the experience for the user, it's really kind of understanding not only who your audience is and not only just building these profiles of this is the age demographic and et cetera, but actually understanding what can they gain from the content that you're writing, making sure that it resonates with them, it seems relevant. We don't really want people to open our content, skim through it and be like, that's not relevant for me, and then move on to the next one. So it's really understanding kind of your audience's pain points, what are they trying to achieve, what are their goals, what point are they in their lives potentially, and we can't always sort of cater for everybody. We shouldn't try to do that. And also we often tend to, especially if we do sort of initial research, perhaps on keyword research, we might start making some assumptions afterwards and almost skip the next part, which would be what we call audience analysis.
Excellent. And what are some, you've kind of, we talk about audience analysis, it's quite wide, isn't it? There's a lot of things that you could actually be doing. What are some of the kind of must-haves of an audience analysis if you're when you're looking for the SEO lens that you should be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I know a lot of people start their research with keyword research, which is absolutely fine. So that kind of makes you understand the topic that you might be writing about. What I find though with audience analysis, if you move on to that as a next step, that might sort of broaden your topic even much more. So if I know a lot of people, as part of their research and keyword research, they probably do a search on Google as well and understand what are the related searches, what kind of, I guess, results are available. People also ask, and all the other sort of SERP features. But beyond that, what can be quite interesting is to do the same search perhaps on social media, understanding what comments people are adding to posts, looking at different businesses who are within that same industry or perhaps talking about the same topic on social media that you want to write about, and then moving quite quickly on to sort of user-generated content. For example, on TikTok, there's going to be lots of potential material that you can utilize. And of course, other user-generated content, which is now being pushed forward a lot, on Google especially are the forums, and looking at discussions in like forums, whether it's Quora or Reddit, or obviously there will be perhaps some closed communities as well on different platforms like Facebook, and really reading through conversations that people are having about the topic. That could be a really nice way to also get ideas for your own FAQs, which aren't necessarily just repeated of what you already find on Google, but they might be a bit more detailed, a bit more, I guess, easier to resonate with as well by your audience.
Yeah, and another thing, we've spoken about this with 𝗧cie last episode, and that I would add is just going back to the basics as well and taking it offline, collaborating with other departments, and particularly, if you're in the SaaS space, you need to kind of review the tool. You need to go through a demo, see how your salespeople are actually talking about the product, because it gives you a lot of information about who the audience is, what they're looking for, what are the goals, what are the pain points, and things like that. And coming back to kind of like one of the things in audience analysis that's been around for ages is this idea of a persona. Yeah. So do you use them in your agencies? Do you do you love them? Do you hate them? It's a bit of a kind of, a controversial one. Everybody has an opinion whether they're useful or not.
Yeah, well, interestingly, we do sometimes use them for clients as well, but often clients have their own versions, and perhaps it's something that we can utilize as a baseline, but then moving forward, we'll probably do a bit additional research as well. We do use them more for our own marketing, which is quite interesting. I do find it that it can be quite limiting, and it like I said, is perhaps like a nice baseline to start with, but you also don't want to make too many assumptions and assume things just based on people's, I don't know, age or their professional background, but actually understanding what kind of journey are they in when they are searching for this content is perhaps more important. But yeah, and I guess there's a danger that we often think that we know something and based on our own personal experiences, and that's the kind of classic, I guess, challenge that marketers have in general, is to think that everybody's the same as us and they probably want the same things, or they feel about things the same way as we do, which is not true. I mean, there's 8 billion people on this planet. We're not all the same. So that's why I guess getting to a very sort of deep analysis on your audience is not just for one piece of content. It can be for lots and lots of content that you can more easily write, more easily produce, and perhaps even optimize your existing pieces as well.
I think from one of the things that I kind of I take from it, and what's kind of interesting to me is these like emerging questions, or these emerging kind of themes that are developing within your audience. So like whether if you are like a SaaS, or no matter no matter what you are really, so if you've got a product, or if you've got something where your audience are that they're finding an issue or a bug, or they're finding a new use case, or they're finding an adaptation, and it's keeping the tabs on your audience to kind of understand and figure out, okay, well, what are they using and finding with our product, or what, and making sure that you're bringing that into your content, because obviously it's recognizing, I guess that's the limitation, like you were mentioning about keyword research and things. I mean, those are things, and that's things that are already in existence, whereas obviously the emerging thing is much more interesting, because it's like, well, we don't know how popular or how much search volume that's going to have, but it's pinpointing. It's almost like predicting something that's going to be coming forward. How do you identify, and like you like yourself, and obviously with your clients and in your agency, how do you identify kind of emerging trends or emerging questions that with audiences?
I think what you said there is speaking to other teams, for example, customer care teams. They have so much really good information that is obviously not publicly available, whether it's existing customers, sending them feedback on the product, it might be potential customers sending them questions about, areas that they can't find already on the website. So that's almost like a golden opportunity for content to be crafted based on those questions or feedback or sometimes complaints. It's the same with, obviously, some of it will be publicly available, like you mentioned, for example, product reviews, especially in the SaaS area. There's tons of different websites that would probably list hopefully you've listed your company in them. And one option, obviously, not by just manually searching and reading through all the reviews. There's different scraping tools that you can utilize to pull that data into, for example, a CSV file. And what you can do is use AI to perhaps do some sentiment analysis on the review text itself. Perhaps try to pick out like specific keywords that tend to be mentioned, and that can sort of enrich your existing keyword research as well. And like you mentioned, there might be elements that current keyword research tools won't have in their database. Some of them might be quite specific, but even though they're specific, it doesn't mean that only one person finds it interesting or useful. Most likely there's going to be somebody else with the same problem, but they haven't thought about trying to fix it yet. So I think definitely elements that your existing audience already battle with, it can be very beneficial in your research.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, we spoke about kind of how to approach it, but what, as an agency, and I know that this is completely true sometimes for us as well, you kind of a client comes to you and they really need help. So they have a content strategy that hasn't been working. All of the traffic is completely irrelevant. They're not getting conversions. Have you ever been in a situation where, you kind of came in and completely kind of detonated their content strategy by doing things correctly? So actually kind of going in with an audience analysis. And what are some of the kind of lessons that you've learned from that? I love examples like that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I love detonating content, to be honest. So it can be very satisfying, especially having worked on, a lot of content strategies ourselves. It can be much easier to pinpoint some of the issues. And although often the topics that clients might already write about, they're absolutely fine, very relevant, interesting. However, the actual, I guess, presentation of it, the production of the content, that's usually where we tweak things much more than the actual topics themselves. So, for example, if we have a informational piece of content, and you start reading yourself, you're like, but you promised me this, you're not delivering it to me. I thought I would get it from this content, but it's not good enough for me, so I'm just going to not read it. So it's all about sort of, I guess, providing a promise, whether it's in the H1 or title, and then delivering on that promise as well. And the promise that you're giving, you should be obviously relevant for your audience. So that's where the different elements of when you're, for example, writing a content brief, these are the things that you want to mention for your content team to take into consideration. And also sometimes you might find that not your whole audience might not find just text content interesting enough, or they perhaps don't want to consume content in that way. That's when things like audience research tools can be very interesting, like SparkToro, SEMrush, finding out what social platforms do they spend most time in. If, for example, I've done a lot of research on gardening recently, obviously, because it's spring. And I did some example tests on specific sort of age groups. And interestingly, I found that a lot of them obviously spend time on YouTube because it might give you a bit more easier way to explain things in a video format rather than just text. So that might give you some ideas on how to repurpose your existing content into different format that perhaps maybe will be easier for your audience to consume.
I guess that's a really important point, actually, is that, not all helpful content, is going to just be like, your kind of standard blog article on your site. It's like actually thinking outside the box now with so many different platforms and channels to choose from. Actually, what's the best suited for our audience, but also what's the best suited for, for this particular question or this particular demonstration or something, right? So yeah, I think that's a really important kind of, it's an important point to make, really. And I think it's also obviously what people expect as well. I think, with you have like we're in the past thinking about examples where you have like a dedicated support is like, well, actually, does this just need to be one question in the support center or in the kind of on that side of stuff, or does that need to be like its own blog? Does it need to be its own kind of article to explain that? So yeah, I think it's a really, really important distinction. Yeah.
Very true. And I guess the area where you house the content, it also changes the way you deliver it, of course. So if we're talking about support content, is probably very direct, very quick answer to a question, whether, if it's a technical product, for example, whereas then a blog content would probably explain a bit more detail, background information, different examples, etc. So like you said, is really important to understand where would the user find it most useful, and how would you want to deliver the content so that they actually find it helpful in the situation.
Did you find, one of the things that we haven't, like, this is all great, like in theory on Google, it should all work. You should have a query with the right intent, and your first 3 or first page results should lead you to an answer to your query. However, it doesn't always work like that, particularly these days with Google being a little bit messed up. So how do you kind of balance that audience sometimes versus SEO? So as an example, some of the queries, when you put them into search engines, they will, you write an article and it's spot on to your audience. You've done your audience research. You've put in, everything is optimized a bit, in terms of H1, a couple of keywords, all of that stuff is done, but you're not ranking. And one of the reasons why you're not ranking is you might not be giving the information that's very basic, that the your audience is not going to be looking for. For example, if you want to work for e-learning, if you want to rank for a keyword that's so digital assessments, let's say, and you have to you feel like you have to put in a definition of that term to be able to rank, but actually your audience already knows what this is. The intent is, that's not the intent behind that keyword for your audience. So have you had experience with this? Because I know we have in our agency. And how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny because personally, when I do a search and I know already, whether it's, for example, something around, I don't know, SEO or marketing, and I find an article that is really sort of quite comprehensive and I find it interesting, and at the top they often have a definition of the item that I already know. It doesn't necessarily bother me, but I think I do get what you mean, is kind of not catering to an advanced audience by providing them to basic content. I guess it depends on, you can still do that by delivering it in a more expert way. One way you could do it is by having an expert quote what they think the thing is, and you can present it on the page very nicely in like a specific design, a bit of like a quotation bubble, have linked to that person who said that definition. And I think it's just how you deliver the content without necessarily starting the whole blog, what is the topic, but actually just saying, this and this director, they define the topic by this definition. So I think there's a few different ways to actually deliver it. Often, obviously, some content writers would prefer to put that sort of more basic content somewhere in the bottom of like FAQs, just to like add it as almost like a just in case, like if you missed if you missed our previous blog, this is the extra information that you need. But yeah, it's all about thinking about what in that moment is interesting for the user to consume it as. And obviously one way to do it is also through internal links that you might want to say, if you want to learn more about more of the basics of this content or this topic, just go to our blog where we explain it better.
Yeah, this is what we found. We've kind of, because there is, rightfully so, there's pushback sometimes, for what, there's this like push and pull between what kind of you're seeing in the SERPs and what looking at the audience analysis actually works for the audience. So it's interesting, not to mention like the whole thing about, like conversion rate optimizations and things where you have like massive articles that Google loves, but conversion hates because nobody wants to like read these really, really big, long form articles that have everything in the kitchen sink just to try and rank, which, that's not how you should be doing it anyway. So,
yeah, exactly. I've always also found that if we want to make things, or if we want to produce content in a slightly different way, especially if you have something that you just want to add to the page, but you don't want it to annoy the user, like one way you could do it potentially is scripting into an audio file instead of having it all written down. So it would be more, also because it's been, I guess, read out, it's a bit more human, more personal as well. And perhaps you can write it in a slightly different tone as it's been read out. So that could add some extra benefits to your content in a way that you don't necessarily need to just add all the boring stuff to the beginning of the blog and then perhaps make users avoid the content overall.
Yeah, because that's the danger, isn't it? You don't want to like teach your audience to suck eggs in a way. A lot of your audience already knows about these things. So no, I always find it interesting.
That's it. I mean, that's like a demonstration of like, you kind of, your audience well if you can kind of, it's like you're doing the right things if you can go and write an article and you know that you don't need to spend, I don't know, the first kind of 2-3 paragraphs of your blog, kind of setting the, okay, right, this, gardening, okay, this is a spade, like this is a trowel, you don't have to, you don't need, because and if you get to the stage where obviously it's a lot more advanced and specific like that for your industry, it's like your audience, you can kind of tell that your audience well if you are writing an article, and you don't have to do that because you know that your readers at that point will be coming in already with that kind of foundational knowledge or a certain kind of level of knowledge and to access that piece of content. And I think that obviously, kind of goes into obviously mapping that to obviously different stages of the consideration cycle, the sales funnel and whatnot. Excuse me. But yeah, I think, it kind of, I think that's the thing, is that if you can be confident enough and kind of say, well, actually, I don't need to be talking. You've got an article and you don't need to be making those kind of points and those definitions. And that might be a sign that actually your audience well. Then you're doing the right things. So
and it's the building of EEAT. This is why I like the kind of like where Google is going. It's moving away from that a little bit towards like, let's build a topical authority. Let's build the authority, the brand of the website. And my hope is once that happens, you won't need to like have definitions. You won't, it will actually be for your audience, unless you want to have it as, maybe I've seen like glossaries and stuff. That's cool. I think having like a glossary of those terms works well.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes that might then feed into your whole integrated content strategy, whether it's for link building purposes, digital PR purposes. And once you've defined the very specific segment of the audience that you want to target, then you will also know the other publications and other brands that they'd be following, with whom you probably want to have a bit of a connection with, and maybe even get a campaign or even guest posts being published. So I think it's important to not only stick to that specific content production plan, And I guess when we're talking about adding elements to the page outside of just the basics, you can add so much rich content that would be better than what your competitors are doing. And that could be the competitive advantage that you need to start ranking higher. We have started seeing more, graphs, more tables, more specific customized imagery as well, added to the content, which is great because it just makes the experience nicer and more helpful for the user. So even based on your competitor research, you might see that, okay, everybody's saying, what is this topic in the beginning? Maybe we should as well. But there might be other options as well for you to enrich the content without having to do that.
Yeah, and it is that, enrichment. And this leads us that we can't have like a podcast without AI. And I think there's this massive piece of work if you are kind of using it. I'm not suggesting you should be using it, but there's this we've had experiences of people using it, but then this enrichment definitely needs to happen on the top of it. But in terms of audience analysis in particular, have you used it for your audience analysis? Is it even useful for that? What can you do with it? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, it can be useful, especially in the sort of beginning stages, like whilst you're doing, for example, your keyword research. You might want to ask, without having to do the manual search on Google, you could ask the AI, like, what do these kind of people find interesting? What are the elements that I should be considering when I'm building my strategy or when I'm starting to write content? Obviously, the responses won't be very unique. You will get the same responses that you would from Google. It just might make it much quicker. But also, I guess it depends on how much time you're willing to spend on prompting it and trying to find exactly what you're looking for, instead of actually perhaps going directly to the more sort of user-generated content or other areas that can provide you, even more detailed answers. So it can be beneficial, obviously, in the beginning, just to spark some ideas, I would say.
Yeah, it's the brainstorming, getting you started, but after that, it just falls down the cracks. I think it's terrible. All right, I'm mindful of time as well. So one of the things that we have at the end, over to you, Sean, unless you have more. Do you have another question?
No, that's fine. Yeah, we can move on to room 404, which Emina rightly pointed out that perhaps actually should be called room 410. But I like to think room 404 actually gives like a little bit of a chance for that thing to maybe, come back at one point.
No.
You never know.
Like GA4. Do you think GA4 is ever going to come out of the
you never know. You never know. What about if they change the whole interface to look like UA? Everyone would love it, so.
God,
but like these things we've had before, things in room 404 that have been banished, and they've been kind of tentatively left there, and like, well, maybe they could, come back if they sort their act out or whatever. So yeah.
Always positive, Sean. I'm like, no, get it out, and he's like, well, maybe.
You can always you can always do like a little 301 redirect out of there, can't you? So we can bring it back a little bit. But anyway, this is the segment of the podcast where we ask our guest if they would like to banish something to room 404. Annika, is there anything that you would like to get rid of into room 404 this week?
It's funny because I think Emina kind of mentioned it already. I was going to be like, no, let's not talk about it yet. It's the whole conversation that we're having about like AI generated content. Not only the fact that it's happening, but I'm just so tired of the whole conversation. Like, are we still asking the question really that are you writing content using AI? I'm also, I don't know, we're still seeing all these so-called case studies on social media. Oh, I've got this website and I wrote all the content in AI and Google hasn't done anything. And yeah, well, exactly. And then there's a little caveat. Oh, by the way, don't do this for a site that you really, cherish. So I think that whole idea is, it just makes it really difficult for, I think, especially new SEOs to know what to focus on, because it can be really confusing when we're seeing like, oh, this graph is going up, it's going up, but then we'll never hear the results because there will be a change and the graph will definitely change. But yeah, I think that whole conversation catches like end. It's just a bit of a time waste, I think.
Yeah, we
based
can.
on all the conversation that we had today, the benefit of having a human do a lot of this work with the help from AI, but mainly, you by being human, you know what it's like being a human, so you can have higher empathy and compassion and sympathy for your audience, and understand, how you could potentially help them.
Yeah, but it's also like, it's misunderstanding what LLMs actually are. We're not actually talking about AI here. There's no intelligence there. It's a predictive model. It's not like, so yeah, don't get me started. I agree with you.
Yeah, I guess it's that's the thing. It's working out and kind of. There's obviously going to be the strengths and the weaknesses, and I think like with the way how fast things have moved. But I think I agree that that kind of that conversation is been it's been had like lots of times now, and I think we're not at a stage where it's like or should we, and maybe we should, or should we be creating sites and all that. And it's exactly like you said, is that we've got plenty of evidence now to kind of say, well, AI has some strengths, and using OpenAI, using any of the the LLMs or anything in assistance is like, well, yeah, let's use it for the strengths, but it's still with that that caveat and that insurance that actually you really need to manage it, because as we've seen all of the examples of people just kind of crashing and burning and kind of exploiting that tool and that new technology. If you exploit anything like that, then it's just not a way forward. It's not a way to it's not a way forward for kind of sustainable growth anyway, for any kind of business. So yeah, no, good one. So yeah, that is gone into room 404.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you for that contribution, Annika.
Yeah. Now you can say, Annika, if anybody starts talking about it, you just say, "Oh no, 404."
Yeah.
Oh no, 404.
Error. Can't hear you.
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I think we can allow you just to, if there's any places where people can find you on socials, if you could share those.
Yeah, well, mainly LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter. Like Emina loves to say Twitter instead of X.
Twitter, no X.
Exactly. But I'm very poor at Twitter, which I think a lot of people are starting to be. So mainly I would say LinkedIn.
Brilliant. So yeah,
And
everybody,
just my name.
yeah, please find Annika on LinkedIn. And also, yeah, we'll be back next week with another guest, Emina.
Yeah, I think so. I need to check my my guest sheet. It's getting like pretty full. Yeah, busy. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this week. Yeah, please do let us know in the comments if you have any questions, and keep the conversation going. We'd love to discuss more about it with you. And yeah, thanks very much again for joining us, and we shall see you next time on SEOs Getting Coffee. See you later, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.